Hi, this is Richard Liu of Ironwood Cider, located in Niagara Lake, Ontario, and I'm also the chair of Ontario Craft Cider Association, and you are listening to Cider Chats. Yeah.
Episode 138. Hello and welcome to Cider Chat. My name is Rhea Wincaller, and I am the producer and cider MC of this weekly podcast, where we speak with makers, cider enthusiasts, and folks within the cider trade from around the world. This week, we're talking about the Ontario Craft Cider Association because Richard Liu happens to be the chair for that association, and he's also the owner of Ironwood, a cidery based at Niagara-on-the-Lake, which is not too far. Actually, almost feels like a stone throw from Niagara Falls, but it's a little bit further. There's going to be more on that chat with Richard coming right up. But first, let's talk a little bit about what's happening out and about in Ciderville. Last week's episode was with Jennifer Dean of County Cider Company, which is based up in Prince Edward County. That is the North Shore region of Lake Ontario. Lovely region. I was up there and also speaking to our guest this week because, well, I was sponsored to come to Canada to do the cider tour trip. So a big tip of the glass to Ryan Monkman of Field Bird Cider. As he starts getting his cidery up, you want to definitely look for it because by supporting him, you in turn support Cider Chat. And I want to just take a little break here and then we'll come back with the letter that I did not get to read on last week's episode, all about Sidra and coming in from the importer known as Ciders of Spain. This letter came in from James Aspel of Ciders of Spain right after the episode 135 came out, which was titled Viejo High Pours in Fishtown, Philadelphia, which featured Viejo, a cider made by Current Cider, and their new tasting room based in Fishtown, Philadelphia. And I highly recommend going to see them and to support Current Cider because they really support this here podcast. So I was excited to hear what James' take on all that was. So I'm going to do a little bit of a snapshot of some of what he wrote because it is a very long letter. So here we go. He writes, I guess Viejo is a Sidra style cider. I'm all for that. But if so, I need to put something straight. A Poran, while foisted on tourists by the Basques, is just no way to appreciate Sidra, or something that its maker would like to provide some of Sidra's pleasures. The Poran does exactly the opposite of what you need to fully enjoy a Sidra. It concentrates the stream and sends it right down your gullet, unaerated, rather than opening the stream and exploding it against the curved wall of the glass. That is true, James. I absolutely agree that if you use the Poran, and there's a photo of it in that episode, so you can look for a link in the show notes or just go to ciderchat.com, episode 135. You'll get to see a picture of a Poran if you're not familiar with it. This is classically a clear glass like pitcher, but it has a very long stem, and it's a delicate piece of glassware. And we're seeing a lot of Americans playing around with it. We're seeing American bartenders, kind of use it to pour down the gullet of a cider drinker's throat, if you will, or to pour it into a glass. Yeah, that's not what they would do in Asturias or in the Basque region. In fact, what I know about Sidra, it needs to be aerated, and typically you pour it in one single glass on the edge, and you only pour really like a shot of it, something that if you're going to be given that glass, and you're given that glass immediately after it's poured, you swallow it right back. You don't sit and savor it like we would, I don't know, a high tannic cider that is meant to be in the glass. It's really, really different style of drinking, and that's part of the fun. And I agree, James. Americans have kind of taken this and gone the long shot way. To entertain tourists, I say, why the heck not? I see nothing wrong with that. I find it entertaining every time I've seen a bartender or somebody kind of swing it back and the whole crowd gets going. I think that's a hip hip hooray time for Cidra and just that kind of sour style. And, no, we cannot make Cidra like they do in Asturias or in the Basque region. We can't, because we don't have the same terroir. It will never be the same. We make our own version wherever we are in the world. Should we call it Cidra? Maybe we should call it sour cider. I don't know. We're still trying to figure that out, aren't we? Cidra isn't, as far as I know, a trademark name, but Americans are using it. So I guess it's okay. It's not trademark. However, like the word pommon, which is a French word, is totally trademarked and really shouldn't be used by American makers. So that just brings me to the point that I think we need to find our own names for this, and we're having our own style, and it's kind of all good. Keep up your good work, James, importing Cidra from Spain. If you want to send some my way, that'd be great. I'd love to taste some and talk about it. And as far as it being, a bad thing, I don't see anything wrong with it. What they're doing down at the Fishtown bar for Current Cider is having fun. And in Ciderville, it's all about having fun. If you have a thought about something that's come on this podcast, do not hesitate to send it this way. All these comments are good and really appreciated. You could just send me an email to Ria, that's spelled RIA, at ciderchat.com. It's never too early to start planning for travel out and about to cider festivals and cider tours. Speaking of which, don't forget the Normandy Cider Tour that I am leading coming up the last week of September. Oh my goodness. I was just talking to one of the folks going on it, and we're like, oh, we can't believe it's like T-minus how many days, like 41 days or something insane. I mean, time is flying by. So exciting to just be able to wander out and about in Normandy and hang out with some of the most amazing cider makers while there. Ooh. If you want to go, there are 2 slots that are still open for that trip. So just contact me, Ria at ciderchat.com, or you could go to the Totally Cider page at ciderchat.com to get the details. But what I really want to talk about besides that is cider festivals, and there is one that is going to kind of coincide with this conversation with Richard at Ironwood, and that is the Toronto Cider Festival. That is a 2-day event with a couple sessions on Friday, August 24th and the 25th. One thing about Canada, the drinking age is 19. So if you're up in that area and you're interested in cider, you have to be at least 19 years old to be able to go to this Cider Fest, which really looks like an outstanding time. So there's a link in the show notes to that. And then the second festival happens on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, and that is in Ross-on-Wye, which is the Herefordshire region of the UK. So that's West County. And we just love Ross-on-Wye Cider and Perry Company. And this is their event. It's going to be taking place again at the end of August on the 31st through September 2nd. And it includes camping. That's what I like about the Brits. I mean, they don't just have a cider festival and then everybody closes shop and goes their different ways. No, they are partying when the sun goes down, camping. I freaking love that. So if you want to check out that festival, you could just kind of Google it, or you could find it also on the links to the show notes. Again, it is the 2018 Ross Cider Festival. Coming up next here, we're going to be speaking with the chair of the Ontario Craft Cider Association. And Richard Liu is also the owner of Ironwood, a cidery and also a winery called Sunnybrook, based in Niagara-on-the-Lake. Now, I was excited to post this particular episode before a bevy of other Canadian makers that I had spoken to while on my cider tour out and about in Ontario, specifically because I wanted to hear what was happening on the business side of this growing market for Ontario's cider makers. So we're going to delve into that full speed ahead in this chat. But before we get there, we're going to find a little bit about Richard's background himself. So let's all now grab a glass and join this chat with Richard Liu of Ironwood Cider in Niagara-on-the-Lake in Ontario, Canada.
I was born in Taiwan. Immigrated to Canada with my family when I was 10, and did all my schooling here, all the way through undergrad, and never really been I wouldn't say I was a craft fan per se. At that point of my life, obviously I was still not legal yet, but for the most of that time frame.
Well, isn't the drinking age a little bit lower in
Yeah,
Canada?
it is. It's 19.
It's 19.
So
okay.
usually by the second year of your university. Not to mention, not to say that's when people usually started their first.
Right. Not that we promote underage
no,
drinking
exactly.
at all,
No, of course not. Definitely not.
Folks know.
But it wasn't really, it wasn't something, it was, so that's kind of what I wouldn't say that was affiliated with cider per se. And when I finished my undergrad, I went to Asia and worked in the corporates for a few years, and mostly on the marketing side. And we decided, me and my wife at the time, decided that we want to start a family. So we decided to move back to Canada, and we were looking at a few options in terms of what we could do in Canada. And I've always wanted to start my own business. Just because that's kind of what my parents were, small business owners, and so growing up, that was the kind of the ideal. They never really tell me about the hard works of being a small business owner. If they did tell me, then I probably would have not do it. But anyways, that was the time. It was when I just turned 30. I had really kind of the hard, soul searching. I freaked out. I have to admit, when I no longer put that 2 in my front. I don't know if you're probably not there yet, but you were there. I couldn't sleep for that whole night when I turned 30.
Wow.
And I was just like, wow, like what am I doing? And is this really what I want? And so at the time I was like, you know what, let's look at things and see how it works. And so I started looking to booze industry, really, just because of the not because of the I wouldn't say not because I love to drink it, but because of the fact that I would be able to live in the rural communities. To me, that's a big something I really wanted to be able to achieve. When I was in Taiwan, my grandparents were farmers. So as a little kid, I used to spend a lot of time in the farm, and I really enjoyed the time there. Obviously, I moved into the city and never really left, but I was really hoping that at least my son would be, my kids would be able to enjoy some of that. Unfortunately, my parents are not farmers, so they live in a high-rise condo in the city. So there's no sense of my son ever visiting their grandparents in the farm. They're going to an elevator, press something in and go up. So that's not really ideal to me. So I settled, and I was like, you know what, this is, I want to do something rural and related, and I kind of settled on the alcohol, beverage alcohol side of things. Yeah. And at the time, I didn't know exactly. I mean, I did all the research, a lot of that stuff. But I was still a little bit wasn't really sure. And then But I still moved here, thinking that I was going to go to. There's Niagara, obviously, is kind of like the winemaking capital of Canada. You can, for sure. I'd say that would be fair. And thinking about going to school, and then so that's what was my plan, is to kind of learn the trade, maybe work at the wineries for a while, and then see kind of go from there. And this place was put on for sale, and it was really reasonable. So it was basically a price of a Toronto condo. So anyways, I was looking at it, and I was like, I'll just do it.
Wow.
And that was when I didn't know anything. I know it from textbook. I know those diagrams. I know how all you pitch the yeast in, yeast will convert sugar into alcohol. I know all that stuff, but I mean, obviously doing it. So the first 2 years for sure was really difficult. But especially the first year. But after first year, I started to get a really hang of it, and just before this, we were talking about how I got into the cider space. Initially I was thinking about getting into winery, but obviously with the reasons I mentioned, in terms of getting access in the wholesale side of things. I'm a wholesale guy. I'm not really the kind of guy who just want to have this retail storefront and sell my product through the door. I mean, obviously there are many people who like that kind of business model. But for me, just because one of the reasons why I really want to do this is because I want to be able to export Canadian products to outside of Canada. The one thing that I really felt, and this is something that I really want to do, is to really kind of expand that Canadian footprint. Because Canadian is not. I'm a Canadian, and but obviously I spent many years in Asia, working for all American companies, and there's not really any Canadian presence outside of Canada. To me, that's something I really want to see if I can be able to just do a little bit of my part to make it work. So for me, I've always, for sure I know that I need to have a presence in, say, LCBO. That's our retailers, just kind of so that way I can get the production up and potentially look at one day to really look at exporting, whether it's to the U.S. or even Europe. It would be really cool if I could export my product to Europe as a made in Canada product. And that's so. Having said that, so I was looking at the whole things and. Looking at how hard it is and not to say that it's impossible, but I didn't know that I had this thing in mind. When I bought this company, they specialize in fruit wine, but they actually also have a really small cider product. It's really small, and literally, I think we only made like maybe 3,000 liters a year, and then we would bottle it, and then that's it. And so we did that for the first year. And the reception is actually really good, and from the customers. From the customers coming through. This is 2013 though.
2013. Well, that's not the height yet.
No, I would say that we're not even close to the height yet. But obviously things really exploded because of there's a couple factors, but for sure, just to be totally fair about this, I say the introduction of Brickworks Cider House in Toronto in 2015, I believe. 2015. That was the turning point. That was kind of the beginning of the turning points.
And what is Brickworks?
There used to be a contract cider maker based in Toronto. They were independent for about 2 years, and then they got bought by AB InBev. In 2016.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so
that would be Labatt. Labatt is the Canadian arm of AB InBev in Canada.
InBev is what in the U.S. folks would know as like Budweiser, which is owned by InBev, and it's
That's
actually
correct.
InBev's
is a Brazilian company.
Multinational.
Yeah. So Brickworks was there are obviously guys like Palmies who kind of brought that mainstream kind of perception to cider to extent. I mean, because there's still at the grand scheme of things, everyone's still very small. So there's a couple names like Thornberry was kind of the longest name. but they're kind of on and off just because of the ownership change. They change owners like every 2-3 years. Hopefully, this is gonna be the last. This is gonna be the last time for a while. But they had some management issues, I guess. I don't know why, but they were kind of like the Ontario Craft Cider. There wasn't really a Ontario Craft Cider destination.
Palmies was.
So in 2012, so going to LCCA, so Ontario Craft Cider Association. I'd say we're more recognized in the last 2 years, but obviously when I first joined. I joined OCCA in 2013 when I first entered.
And when the association began?
2012.
2012. Okay.
Yeah, it was 6 guys, I believe, and Palmies was one of the the founders, and Nick Sutcliffe from Palmies was actually the first chair of the association. So they did a lot to try to get it off the ground, but obviously the first 3 years was just like 10 dudes. Just sitting around the table. There's nothing really happening.
Are there
not much happening.
Women cider makers in
yeah, there are. Yeah, for sure. I mean, just recently. I think when it was first started in 2012, no, there wasn't a female lead in the cider. But now, I think there's probably three or four.
Okay.
Jennifer Dean, she's taking over. County Cider since Grant Hall's passed away.
Oh,
so
okay.
she's
and County Cider has been around.
And County Cider has been around. And obviously Ernest Cider by Michelle Ferris.
Okay.
And there's got to be a couple more. So right now OCCA has about 40 members, full members.
And then we're saying you do a lot of alphabets here. OCTA.
OCCA. Ontario Craft Cider Association.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
I think that's what it was, but I want to make sure the listeners know what it is.
Right.
Too.
So we're we're obviously the only kind of the craft cider producer organization in Ontario. Based on what I know, we're pretty much the only one really in Canada with some sort of operation. There's obviously Ontario is the biggest apple growing province in Canada. We actually grow more apples in Quebec. Quebec will be a close second, and obviously they're known for the ice cider in Quebec.
That's right. Yes, they are.
There are a couple guys who really started to get into the cider space in Quebec. But just from when we're talking about low alcohol carbonated sparkling beverage, they're still very behind.
Interesting.
And there's obviously, and the third biggest would be BC, and there's everyone else that is very small. Everyone else, so there's the 3 bigger provinces would really grow apples: Ontario, Quebec, and BC. Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia grows. Maybe somewhere. I don't know how many acres.
There's a happening scene in Nova Scotia. There are all these listeners out there. We are watching you, Nova Scotia.
Yeah. I've talked to cider producers in Nova Scotia. It's their economic model is a little bit different.
Okay.
Because our pricing is still very consistent. I know how much Michigan are selling their apples for. I know how much New York State are selling their apples for. Ontario can compete with that. Not Nova Scotia.
Right, but Ontario can compete at the culinary level of apples.
That's correct.
Now, but
we're not.
cider,
yeah, so that's one thing, and that's probably something we could go into from a cider apple perspective. It's going to be tough, to be honest. But BC has some. Has some sort of cider operation, but just because they're growing area and their consumer, which is Vancouver, it's so distant. It's a 5-hour drive, and it's not a smooth 5-hour drive. It's a lot of windy roads.
Oh, definitely.
It's a lot of windy 5-hour drive. So Okanagan is where they all grow that's their fruit belts. It's Okanagan.
Yeah.
And for the producers to have a really good access to the city, which is Vancouver, coastal city, it's really hard. So I know that the coastal city is trying to have their own stuff, just because, and that's what makes Ontario really unique. What I find is that there is a space for both, sort of, so to speak, the kind of the more commercial-minded producer, and for the craft producer. Or I would say, sort of like really funky, going to I don't even want to make craft. You have to use you have to make sours in order to just to validate yourself as a craft. I wouldn't say that.
Oh, okay.
But I think even like the city cider producers in Vancouver are not even thinking about like doing that. But it's just like we just don't want to make. Because BC has a different kind of licensing. See, in Canada, it all comes down to licensing, manufacturing licensing.
Getting that, yeah.
It's very regulated, and different kind of licensing allows you to do different stuff. Mostly dictates the way you can sell your products. And so there's the land based. So that they actually have this license called land based. So you essentially need to have, I think, 5 or 10 acres of land, and then you can sell from your site. And we have that similar here too.
Yeah, that's a hard one. I mean, if you want to be in the city having like an urban cidery,
right,
then there's not really an opportunity to do that.
Right.
And so I'm wondering, from your position on the Ontario Craft Cider Association and the government, like what
we do a lot. Yeah.
I mean, this seems like a new opportunity for Canada at like an amazing level.
For sure.
So how much is the association involved?
Very much so.
Okay.
Yeah, very much so.
And are there key players in the government that you work with? What?
Yeah, it would be two. The two ministries that we talk to the most by far will be OMAFRA. So that would be the Ministry of Agriculture.
Okay.
And Ministry of Agriculture. Well, they're kind of like
agriculture.
Agriculture.
Oh, agriculture. Okay.
Yeah, so they're kind of like the incubators of the industry, and they obviously do a lot of. I wouldn't say on the policy side, maybe not so much, but definitely from an incubation standpoint, they do a lot of they do a lot of supports for that. And the other one would be the Ministry of Finance.
Ministry of Finance.
So that's all taxation and distribution.
Okay.
And distribution.
So they're the ones who say what you could put on your label and all that.
Ministry of Finance is a very important arm of the government in Ontario, just because Ontario is a lot of things in Ontario's Crown Corporation. It's public run. And it's all under the arms of Ministry of Finance because they own those assets. So LCBO obviously would be LCBO is owned by Ministry of Finance. So talking to LCBO is we still do our maintain dollars.
So it's the distribution is government run.
That's correct.
Oh, okay.
It's owned by Crown Corporation.
And so there is no way to kind of break from that to do self.
Well, the politicians. I mean, that's one of the departments. Obviously, has the government in place has a lot of inputs in terms of how the public assets should be run.
Yeah.
So whoever is in the government. They I mean, it's obviously not very. It's not like something that's you just coming from an MPP's office, and then directly to LCPO. Someone, no, it doesn't work like that. But this is a trickle effect, right?
Wow.
And it's there's a lot of things they can do from from a policy standpoint that they can influence. But I mean, we are talking to, and obviously talking to the Minister of Finance. It's mostly about. Having equal access with craft beer, which is kind of like the new darling of Ontario.
Craft beer.
Craft beer.
And that's a new.
I say within the last 10 years.
Interesting.
Maybe not even 10, maybe 5 to 10 years.
So it seems. Obviously, you watch what's happening down south in the U.S. I mean,
that's correct.
We would say craft beer, 20 years ago, if not more, was kind of hitting the stage. Right. So Canada is
so they made a huge drop off on in the I think it was 2003. The government made a new incubation program that drastically cut the craft beer taxes, volume tax. And I think that's when people start looking at this industry and be like, oh, I think I can actually make it work.
Right.
And I think I mean, even though the program was introduced in the early 2000s, I think the industry really actually started to really kind of launch in around 2010. That's about the time when the industry really started to take off.
2010 for craft beer. That's so interesting to me to hear that. But
I mean, it's give and take, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, that's kind of cool for cider because and they're more in sync than craft beer leading the train. You know, craft cider could kind of come in and both ride that wave. And you know, you're not talking so much about wine. You're really looking at it from that like parallel universe. What's happening in the beer scene. Right. Really provides you with a lot of opportunity to. Right.
For sure, 100%. I mean, craft cider is definitely following the footsteps of craft beer. 100%. Yeah. It's all about getting the product into the consumer's mouths. Yeah. All the marketer knows. Yeah. You know, if you're in the F&B business, it's all about getting that product into, into the consumer.
And the consumer is much like the craft beer consumer, where they coming in and they're saying, "What do you have?"
That's correct, and that's one thing that I think it's a different vibe and it's different demographics. I don't want to say why is this happening to craft beer but not VQA wine, wine, because they've been trying forever. They've been here for at least 30 years, and they've had a lot of supports, but their growth is obviously not close to craft beer. The other thing is that craft beer is a provincial wine industry, so you can make beer anywhere you want. Whereas wine is really just Niagara. It's a Niagara industry. People want to say, yeah, there's something in Prince Edward County. There's some like Erie North, and there's some like scatter slots for people who don't really grow vinifera grapes. But yeah, 90% when the industry, 90% of the industry is Niagara. It's a Niagara industry.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with that, but just from an access points, it's really restricted. The distribution. Yeah. And when you're counting on LCBO, I wouldn't say craft beer made it because of LCBO support. No. Right. It's not because of beer store supports. So we have two monopolies in our retail distribution in Ontario. A beer store owned by multinationals, foreign multinationals, and LCBO, It's craft beer didn't make it because these two distributors started saying that, you know what, I think we should support local craft products. Right. I don't think that ever happened. I think it's more because there's guys in that community who who's really into who's really believes it. Yeah. They're trying to get their neighbor bars. They try really hard. I mean the first 5 years, first 5-10 nowadays to an extent. There's going to be some pushbacks from guys who's used to selling, say, imports or mass domestic, but it's an organic movement.
So that's why your approach and your business plan.
That's why I think craft cider has so much more potential than wine, because the apple growing region is a little bit bigger. It
goes all the way to the Georgian Bay. So that's a huge area. But you had originally said that you are looking at how did you word it? Not necessarily just retail out of your storefront here, right? But to distribute, right? Right. And so that also kind of helps you kind of flood out into all the different places that will actually accept cider. Right. And all the different bars. That's a very...
Yeah, there's not the same thing with the craft beer. there's going to have that hyper kind of local movements where people are more tend to, outside of the, say, GTA market, where it's kind of like everyone can come in there and do their thing. But, Niagara, Kitchener-Waterloo, Ottawa, or, kind of, or Georgian Bay, like you said. Yeah. Everyone's got that kind of their local influence. So it's not. I wouldn't say it's realistic to go out there and be like the Molson of the world and just say we're gonna. It's not. That's not realistic. It's more. So we're really involved in the community, like in the local communities, because
Ironwood is.
Yeah, we are. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, for sure. And we do we participate in a lot of local food events, and it's I think it really
Are these like wine events that you can now bring cider to? When you say a food event, what?
mostly
if I was
like
traveling-
food truck events.
So you were able to have your own like little
booth,
set up and
with
do that?
jockey box and yeah.
How often are there like cider fests up in at this region?
Right now, I think we have give it three, maybe 4 or 5. There's 1 or 2 really big ones, but
And what would those be?
Toronto Cider Festival will be a big one.
And when does that happen?
That will be September, I believe.
Always in September.
Around September.
Okay.
Yeah, Toronto Cider Festival.
And that's where you could expect cider coming in from just Ontario?
Yeah, they usually have. They try to get the multinationals support too. So
multinational, but how about Quebec makers or?
No.
No, so
No.
it's Ontario focused.
That's Ontario focused. Okay. Yeah,
and
that's.
What other cider fests then?
There's a cider festival. Well, I mean, okay, so and then that will be the exclusive cider. So no beer. Only cider.
Okay, yeah.
And then there's the another bigger one would be the Fairmount. There's a lot of time is cider and beer.
Sure. Makes sense, yeah.
So there's a couple big ones like that. And there was a cider fest at Patacombe, but he's not doing it anymore.
So what would be a big beer fest where there would be, a good number of ciders?
The biggest one would be TFOB, a Toronto Festival of Beer. That's massive. You been? It's crazy. It's huge.
And when is that?
And literally, it looks like you
looks
go in
like
there.
you had some good times there.
No. I was pouring. Well, I still kind of walk around,
Sure.
but we were there for 2 years. And the kind of things that you see, like you thought you only see in those music videos.
Oh my
like
goodness!
You see a Budweiser stage. Literally,
yes, I know. Yeah.
Literally a Budweiser stage.
Yeah. It actually happens. So when does that festival take place?
That would be July.
July. Okay.
Yes, and there's a couple independent craft beer shows. It's usually very. I mean, every town has their own thing. Like Niagara will have a Niagara Beer Festival.
Right.
Burlington has a big beer festival.
And cider's always present.
Georgetown,
right.
Yeah. So every municipalities tend to have their, and it's all usually pretty good. Like the ones that we really like ourselves would be Because Beer in Hamilton, and that takes place in July. And so all the show seasons, summer months, right?
Yeah.
That's a really neat one. And that typically for those festivals, except for TFOP, which is obviously mostly imports, most of these small municipal ones are very local, and they're all craft.
Got it.
There's got to be the supply. There's got to be the markets. You cannot not have one of the other. You got to have all. But at the same time, sometimes business has to kind of take that risk to really push the envelope
to be able to get that consumer. It just can't happen.
Right.
It doesn't always happen simultaneously.
Right.
And the association's been around since 2012. So here we are.
2018.
Yeah, 2018. Yeah. So it's happening.
I think definitely the taxation is if I have to point to one reason, taxation is definitely the biggest inhibitor of
What would
growth.
you like to see different there in the taxation?
Oh, like paying less taxes. Just at least let us just pay what craft beer pays. Not even I don't think zero is realistic, and I don't think that's right. But it has to be equal, and for people to right now we're taxed like a wine. So we pay the wine taxes, which I don't think makes sense at all. Just because the alcohol is different, the consumer's consumption method is different. People are still making out of this, but people are doing it in a fashion that's it's really hard for them to multiply, to scale up, and it's just tough. And obviously, I mean, compared to beer and wine, cider is still relatively a very a novel drink.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, I have a lot of friends who are still, you know, I wouldn't say all my friends are super craft drinkers. Actually, you know, it's the opposite. Most of my friends, you know, they just drink Buds and Coors Light. And
well, maybe they're doing that because of the economy of it too.
Well, yes and no. I mean, it's I'd say there's Ontario is very controlled. So when it's very controlled, it's very easy for the big guys to have their say, and big guys definitely want people to buy their product. It's very easy for them to convince people to buy their product because they own the distribution. It's not like U.S. where there's a lot of organic movements.
Yes,
so people are, you know, constantly getting that advice. Oh, you're trying this? Oh, you know what? And in America, I have to give it to Americans. Americans are a little bit more adventurous than the Canadians. I mean, you know, there's obviously different values, you know, and I don't want to get into that side of things. But just from a consumption standpoint, from a beverage consumption point, you know, we definitely see the craft growth, and everyone use the U.S. number as reference. If you talk to the brewers, you talk to the vintners, everyone says, well, U.S. is doing this and that. That's their craft consumption ratio. That's what we're shooting for. But, you know, having said that, it's really hard when distribution is controlled by two companies.
Absolutely. I can't even imagine.
And it's even though one is a crown corporation, technically they're supposed to support local companies. They're not going to say no to foreign marketing budgets.
Sure, it's all about the bottom dollar, keeping it going. So how close are you to like making any changes there? Taxation.
Something we're still in negotiation. Obviously, we're going to have our awesome, amazing election in about a week. So you know, who knows what will happen after that? A little bit of that for sure. I mean, Canada is I'd say probably runs more of a federal system than U.S. does, at least from our industry.
Yeah,
in the U.S., it's federally controlled. You know, the TTB controls the
state too, but each state has their
state has a distribution. It controls the distribution, but ultimately that's why but in Canada it's really just provincial. I don't know why it came like this, but literally the federal has very, very, very little inputs in terms of the well-being of our industry.
Interesting. Good luck with that.
So it comes down to provincial leadership, and so it depends on who wins. Obviously, we already have a dialogue started with the relevant personnel in the ministries, but they can't really do anything until they know who the boss is, right?
Right.
So it's really, but yeah, we are talking to them, and we are hoping to get, and I think that's definitely from a government perspective. I think definitely they want to see industry support it, and it's just really the matter of finding out the best way so everyone's getting what they want at the end of the day.
Of course.
But we had a good meetings with LCBO about getting more recognition, getting more support, and I think we're getting there.
Can I ask you, how many cideries are there in Ontario?
Just
right
one.
now.
Just one.
One cidery?
Well, sorry. Oh, cidery.
A cidery.
Oh, sorry. Oh, I said cider week.
Sorry. How many cideries?
We have 40 members.
You have 40 members in that
But there's probably about
association.
60, I say.
60 cideries. And do you know how many are set to be open in this coming year? Is that something that you're seeing?
We're seeing a lot.
And
last year we gained 20 members.
20 members. Just last year.
Yes.
So then, if you're kind of scaling that up in 2019.
Well, I think last year was a anomaly. I don't think that's normal.
Okay.
I don't think we're going to see 20 every year.
Okay.
But definitely we're seeing interest from definitely the existing beverage producers, like the breweries or the wineries. We're looking at ciders like, you know what, let's do it. There's that too.
So that's a change, yeah.
There's that too. Not to say they're converting into a cider producer, but a cider as part of their portfolio.
Right.
And there's definitely guys who are starting out from fresh. They just only want to do cider, and we're seeing some of it too.
Okay.
And typically those are fairly small operations. and they might be generational farmers who doesn't who wants to try something different, and then this, every time I go to a small show, and I'll just always run into hobbyists. And then go into the hobbyists.
Great.
So obviously the generation farmers are just trying to figure out what to make. I wouldn't call them like cider fanatics. That's why they got into the space.
Yeah.
And for guys who are already in this industry, for them it's probably a business decision to add a cider into their portfolio. They're looking at it as a business kind of like, okay, yeah, I think it makes sense. That's what.
But the brewery couldn't bring in a cider unless because of the licensing, right?
They can get a winery license.
They could get a winery license,
yes.
even though they don't have like.
They can sell retail.
They can't.
But they can sell at wholesale.
At wholesale.
So so the breweries would and wineries. Well, wineries typically would be able to sell. I mean, it's the same license for grape wineries too. But typical is a little bit difficult if you're trying to mix them together. I know some guys who do it, but it's very few. But for the breweries, it's really just going, for their wholesale business to kind of add.
So they could sell it on premise off the tap, right? If a brewery made it.
No, they can't.
They can't.
They cannot.
Right. So that's a really deterrent too for.
Yeah. So there's talks about whether we need to, what that license should look like. There are people who thinks that if we allow the breweries to have a free rein to just do whatever they want with cider, the cider only producer is going to collapse. I don't see it like that. I think people ultimately still going to go with what they trust, and I don't necessarily think it would be like that. However, obviously the breweries and the wineries are doing it because of strategic reasons, and then the third group would be the so-called, I'll say, the hobbyist, who really likes making interesting stuff, and we definitely have people like
Fantastic.
that too.
Yeah.
And they're typically the kind of people who do the funkier stuff.
Right.
And
they'll be pushing the whole cider.
They're pushing the envelope. Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly.
Yeah.
And the one thing with cider is that it does, the cider industry does allow people to be a little bit adventurous, unlike the wineries. Wineries have a huge capital investments to make it work. For people who are dumping a couple mil into the project, for them to be like, yeah, let's do something crazy. It's probably a little bit. It doesn't really jive that much. But because cider startup cost is relatively a lot smaller than the wineries, it's a lot easier for cider producers to be like, yeah, let's do something crazy. And so we're definitely seeing some of that too. And because of our market, because of just how dynamic the Ontario market is, there are actually takers for that too. Surprisingly,
right now.
The first couple of times I tried something, I was like, no, come on. Like I personally don't like it just because I'm an industry guy, but I'm just like, there's no way my friends or any of the people I know will actually drink this. But it turns out that people actually do drink this.
Hello, there you go, right?
So it's like, okay, well, I guess, but it's and it's good to have people covering all angles, because the last thing you want is everyone making the same stuff. You want people to making different stuff, so that way you keep getting to And honestly, I still think cider has we still even haven't, the growth is slow a little bit, but I really think that we're not even seeing the full potential of the cider just because we haven't got that full support from the LCBO yet. I think having some sort of support from LCBO is going to really change the way the things look. If we get a better taxation, that means we will be able to really compete with the imports. I'd say at least 50%, well, 50% sounds low, at least 80% of accounts still carrying imports. And if we have more ammunition, I think we can really turn the tide and then get people to really try Ontario and really, so I really think that from a 5 to 10 years perspective, and this is just within the current climates of the market. Who knows what the market is going to change 10 years from now? But for sure, from a craft beverage standpoint, And obviously, we're not converting the older demographics. We're converting the 20-year-olds, the 30-year-olds. Well, 10 years after they're going to be 40, and we're still going to be converting. Like, it's just from a you look at a demographic shift. I just think that's it's just. It's the days of people buying. I'm not saying they don't exist; they still don't exist. But the days of people going to a beer store and pick up a 4.8, or those of the same product, those days are gone. Like, who wants to drink that stuff like all the time? And it just the LCBO definitely sees that in their trend. That's why people are really starting getting to the mixer packs. And people are always trying to try different stuff. I'm not saying that people always try different stuff, but it's going from, say, I want to drink one beer to I drink 2 or 3 to now it's like I drink 10. I mix it in cider. Yeah. I'm mixing different kind of product. Like people. I think that's definitely the trend, is that people don't want to just drink the same stuff, and that's obviously what's happening in the States, is that people just don't want to drink the same stuff over and over again.
And certainly gluten-free is a big factor too. That
for
comes
sure.
in.
Cider, and cider is definitely we're not malt-based, so it's less stuffy. That's what a lot of people drink beer. They feel stuffy, and cider doesn't give you that. It's its own thing. It's obviously apple juice fermented, and with there's definitely a lot of people adding different fruit in there to make it as some sort of fruit blend. But I think going back to the cider apples, I think that's something that hasn't really been looked into yet in the Ontario. It's something definitely some producers and some hobbyists are really keen.
They're going to drive that market. Your hobbyists are key. From my perspective, it feels like your hobbyists are key here for getting them involved, like having an association membership for hobbyists.
Right.
Giving them voice. That's what we have in the U.S.
Right. I should look into that. Actually, I was reading a book that talks about the U.S. craft beer industry. I forgot the name of it, but it talks about some of those.
That's what drove the craft beer industry, was the hobbyists. Yeah. And doing tours over to Belgium and seeing what actual beer could taste like, the potential there. Yeah. And I would say that's actually what started the craft cider scene in the U.S. Was the hobbyists. Okay. It started really in Massachusetts, where I'm from. Right. We all put together this cider fest that was just really like homegrown, doing cider making demonstrations, giving people an idea what the root is. And folks, right now, and you're talking about the demographic that you're going for. That demographic wants to know where the product is coming from. At a level that 100%. They want to know that that's coming from a low spray orchard. They want to have a connection with that orchardist. So now you're bringing not only value to the cider industry, but you're bringing that to the orchard growers and the farmers. When you come in with that kind of force for your legislation, you just change the whole picture. And so definitely 100%, it is the hobbyists that really supported that market and are continuing to, without the consumers, you could have the best product in the world and just be sitting in palms. And that happened with the craft beer scene. That is the revolution that happened for craft beer. It was not just, it was folks who were making homebrew and saying, I want to become a commercial brewer. That's exactly what happened. And they're kind of like a target audience, and it's a nice way to increase your membership. Because really, your association, this power is going to become behind the membership.
For sure.
So having at CiderCon this past year, we were seeing a lot of cider enthusiasts. That's what they were kind of like they don't necessarily have voting rights. But they get to come and be involved and get the enthusiasm. It's kind of a lost market that you're not catering to, and they're the ones who are going to come they're going to be your biggest drum beaters. And so it's a really nice way to kind of bring that in and get the enthusiasm, because what happens in the wine scene it's the folks showing up, and those wine enthusiasts.
Yeah, the drinkers, not the maker. Yeah,
the drinkers. Being at the Niagara College yesterday, talking to Dan there, what blew me out of the water is he said, we can't keep the cider on the shelves because people are constantly coming in asking for cider.
Right.
I don't, they're meeting that demand now, right? Having that component, but to come up here and see how pervasive the wine industry is, and to hear that at originally a wine college, if that doesn't make you pause and catch your breath and go, holy crap, man, this is serious. You are right on the pulse right now.
Right.
And to just keep it with makers, it's like with the podcasts, I know a lot of makers listen to this, there's no doubt. But the shift that's happening for Cider Chat is that now it's the consumers that are listening. Well, now, wasn't that a good glass full of cider there? And we got a good backdrop on what's happening in Canada, specifically with the association. And I know that they're going to keep on moving forward because it's almost like a wildfire up there right now in terms of the number of cideries coming on, the enthusiasm that folks are really orchard-based, including also the urban cideries, cider bars, her father's cider bar based in Toronto. There's cool stuff happening there, and it's kind of like a Wild West, if you will. And Richard happens to be kind of a key member of that, being on the chair. Now, I did get to drink some of his ciders while I was there. We went into the tasting room, and I was able to have the original and also the oaked cider. They're using, I believe it was, if I recall correctly, spirals of oak, so it's not barrel aged. And they're really rock solid. He was kind enough to give me some of the original in cans, and I've been enjoying it most recently and sharing it with friends down here. Really nice job. Easy drinking cider, no doubt. And I suspect it's going to grow as they are working feverishly on that addition. So best of luck to Ironwood and to the Ontario Craft Cider Association. I, for one, am someone south of the border to that amazing country of wonderful people, all the Canadians up there, really rooting for you and hoping all the best for the continued growth of cider throughout Canada. If you go to the show notes for this here episode 138, you could see some photos from my trip to Ironwood. I have a whole slew of episodes coming out that I'm editing to keep on rolling out to you. We're going to have a chat with Peckham Cider from New Zealand. That's Alex Peckham. Well, delicious ciders. And Michigan maker, California, and of course, Ontario makers too. I suspect that if you've listened this far, that you're figuring, this is worth an hour of your time. And so I'd like to encourage you to become a patron of Cider Chat via the Cider Chat Patreon page. It's a great way to support this here podcast. Just find the links at ciderchat.com or Google Patreon Cider Chat. That's spelled Patreon. It's a beautiful day at the tail end of July, and I hope the same is true for you wherever you are in whatever month or day of the week that you are listening to this here episode. This is Real Wind Color signing off for now. Looking forward to seeing you in Ciderville.
Yeehaw!